The river was quiet that morning, wrapped in a hush so complete it could have been mistaken for reverence. Mist rose like prayers from its glassy skin, curling through the reeds and soft willow branches that leaned over the banks like old women whispering secrets. The light hadn't fully touched the valley yet, only the pink fingers of dawn, reaching slow and unsure, brushing the sleeping pines. And riding alongside that river, his boots dark with dew and hat pulled low against the coming sun, was a man who spoke to no one, not even himself. He rode as though he belonged to the land, not just upon it, the kind of man who left no more trail in the world than a wind passing through dry grass. His name was Clayton, though most folks in the scattered towns just called him the Quiet One or that cowboy with the crowbone eyes. Not for anything cruel, but for how his gaze seemed hollowed out by grief, like something once lived in him and had long since flown. Clayton wasn't old, but the dust had settled on his shoulders early. In another life, he might have been warm, maybe even gentle, but this world had taught him silence keeps you safe, and stillness makes you forget you're lonely. That morning he was checking the river traps, mostly for beaver or mink, though he didn't trap as much as he used to. Not since the fire 3 winters ago, when his small cabin up in the pines had gone to ash, and with it, the only photograph he owned. He didn't rebuild, just wandered lower, sleeping where the earth offered shelter, cooking what he caught, and speaking only when the wind seemed interested. It was the kind of morning you didn't expect anything from, until he spotted something that didn't belong. At first it looked like a fallen branch, pale, tangled, caught on a bend in the river. But as his horse moved closer, he saw the unmistakable curve of a shoulder, the spill of dark hair over white. His breath caught. He dismounted slowly, the way you'd approach a wounded animal, heart thudding with old instincts. She was floating face up, cradled by a bend in the current, skirts blooming like drowned lilies. Her skin was too still. But when he knelt beside her and brushed her cheek with the back of his hand, it was warm. Cold from the water, but warm underneath. She was breathing. He didn't think, just acted. Pulled her gently from the river's grip, arms slipping under hers. She was heavier than she looked, but not by much. Soaked through, dress clinging to her like a second skin. He laid her down on the grass and pressed a hand to her chest, steady rise and fall. He watched her for a long moment, as though waiting for her eyes to open and explain everything. But she didn't stir. Clayton looked up and down the river. No tracks, no wreckage, no sign of a wagon, horse, or companion. Just her. Dropped there like a secret the world didn't want to keep anymore. She had bruises. A cluster beneath her jaw, more along her arms. Not fresh, not old. He felt something twist in his gut, not anger, not yet, just the recognition of damage. Familiar, like his own reflection on cold mornings. He could have left her. Many would have. But something about the way her hand curled slightly toward him, even unconscious, rooted his boots to the earth. He gathered her up in his arms, careful, slow, and lifted her onto the saddle. He walked beside the horse all the way back to the old hunting shack a mile up, the one he hadn't used in over a year. The roof was half-caved, but the stove still worked, and the bed had only dust and mouse tracks. She didn't wake while he laid her down, didn't flinch when he wrapped her in the old buffalo blanket, or when he lit a fire from the kindling he always kept stacked in case. She slept for hours. He sat nearby, watching the flicker of flame dance shadows across her cheeks. She was young, maybe 25. Not too much younger than he'd once been, before his years stretched out like railroad tracks and kept going without promise of arrival. Her hands were calloused, nails chipped. Not soft. A working woman. But her face, it held the kind of beauty you didn't notice right away. It wasn't delicate. It was strong. Like stone carved by wind. Late that afternoon, her eyes opened. She blinked at the wooden beams above, then turned her head slowly. When she saw him sitting there, quiet, unmoving, she startled. Tried to sit up, but winced and stopped. "You're safe," he said, voice rough from disuse. She didn't speak. Just watched him, wary. I pulled you from the river. Her brow furrowed. Lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Don't try too much, he added softer. You been through something. You need rest. Still she said nothing. But her eyes, dark and sharp as wet obsidian, locked on his like she was weighing something. He brought her water. She sipped with trembling hands, then gave the cup back like it weighed too much. That night she lay awake. He could tell. He sat outside, near the broken rail fence, carving a stick to pass time. The stars were thick, the kind that make you feel small in a way that comforts. Crickets sang around him. From inside, the faint creak of her shifting weight. But no cries. No words. In town 2 days later, he didn't say much when folks asked why he needed bread and medicine. Just that someone was staying a while. The woman at the general store gave him a long look, lips pursed. You found her, didn't you? She asked, voice low. He didn't answer. She's lucky it was you, the woman added. Most would've, well. You know how it is. He did. Back at the shack, the woman had moved to the porch. Sat wrapped in the blanket, eyes closed, face turned to the sun like a flower remembering how. He brought her broth. She took it with a nod. Still no name. Still no questions. That evening, she hummed something under her breath. A tune with no lyrics, just a rise and fall that tugged on something in his ribs. He didn't ask. Just listened. And though she didn't speak, and though her past hung over them like the last glow of twilight before true dark, Clayton felt something in that moment. Something quiet but steady. Like the river had carried her not by accident, but by design. She was a mystery. But he'd seen enough of the world to know, some mysteries don't need solving. Some just need time. And he had plenty of that. The woman hadn't spoken a word in 3 days. Clayton wasn't one to push. He knew what silence could mean. It could be armor or absence, fear or fury, and sometimes all at once. She moved slowly through the small clearing around the cabin, wrapped in the old buffalo blanket, watching the trees like they might move if she looked long enough. Her eyes never left the edges. Always scanning. Always braced. He'd seen that in animals before, half-healed creatures that didn't yet believe in the ground beneath them. She took her meals without complaint. Ate sparingly, always waiting until he finished before lifting her spoon. As though she'd learned, somewhere, that eating first meant punishment. Clayton noticed, but said nothing. He simply left the food and sat across from her, the way you might sit with someone grieving. Not to fill the air, but to share in it. Each day, she lingered a little longer outside. Watched the sun fall between the trees like it might take her story with it. Still, she didn't speak. But her presence, once brittle and ghost-like, began to root itself in small ways. She folded the blankets neatly after sleeping. She wiped down the table, unasked. And one morning, when he returned from chopping kindling, he found the wood stacked higher than before, uneven but earnest. That day, he offered her a pair of worn boots from his pack. They were too big. She slipped her feet in anyway, nodding once. A quiet thank you that didn't need sound. The townsfolk, meanwhile, had started talking. Word moved faster than horses out here. Clayton had no kin in town, no real friends either, but he went down once a week for supplies. This time, folks leaned in closer when he walked through the store. Eyes lingered too long. Whispers swirled like desert dust. She ain't right, that girl, someone muttered to the storekeeper. Found floatin' like a curse come down river. You watch. She's just a woman, Clayton replied flatly, not turning his head. The words quieted the room. His voice wasn't loud, but it had weight. He left with dried goods and a bar of soap. The preacher followed him outside. You know, the preacher said, soft and paternal, a woman like that, she brings questions. People already saying things. I don't care what they say. But she don't belong to you, the preacher pressed. And if she's got trouble behind her, she's safe now. Clayton didn't raise his voice. Didn't have to. The preacher studied him a long second and sighed, as if Clayton were a boy refusing to listen to his better sense. Safe's not always enough. He rode back slower than usual. The words clung. Not because he agreed, but because they echoed a truth he hadn't wanted to name. He didn't know who she was. Didn't know if someone was looking for her. And worst of all, didn't know what he'd do if they were. She was waiting outside when he returned, standing on the porch in those oversized boots, blanket draped like a shawl. Her eyes found his face before they found the saddlebags. She looked tired, but not afraid. Just empty. That night, he built the fire higher than usual. The cold was biting now, and he could see her hands tremble as she sipped from her tin cup. He finally asked, "Do you remember anything?" She stared into the flames. Seconds passed, thick as tar. A whisper, "No." The first word. He looked up sharply, but her gaze stayed on the fire. "Nothing?" he asked, gentler this time. She shook her head once. "Just cold water. Sky." A pause. "Hands. Hurting me." Her voice was dry, cracked like brittle wood. She coughed once, then went quiet again. Clayton didn't press. He nodded, more to himself than to her. The important part had already been said. Someone had hurt her, likely tried to drown her. And whoever it was, they weren't far enough. That night, she slept with the knife he left on the table beside her. He didn't say she could. Didn't have to. It was there, and she reached for it. He only noticed when he saw it in her hand, half buried under the blanket as dawn crept in. 2 days later, a man came knocking. He was young, maybe 30, and wore a vest too fine for riding this far. His boots were polished, his smile sharp. Rode in with dust on his collar but a gold chain on his watch. Clayton stepped onto the porch before the knock finished echoing. "Mornin', sir," the man said brightly. "Heard there was a lady round these parts. Found near drowned, might say. Thought I'd ride up and take a look. See if she's someone I know." Clayton didn't blink. "She's not." "Well now, that's mighty quick of you to say. I haven't even described her yet." "She doesn't know you." The man's smile curled at the edge. "And you'd know that how, friend?" "She told me." "Ah." He scratched his chin, eyes flicking toward the window. "Well, suppose that settles it, don't it?" Clayton didn't move. Didn't offer coffee. The man lingered a moment longer, then tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "If she remembers anything," he said, "you send word. Some folks are awful eager to find her." When he was gone, Clayton returned inside. The woman was sitting on the bed, knees drawn to her chest. She had heard everything. Her eyes were wide, wild again, the way they'd been when he first found her. He said nothing. Instead, he lit the lamp, set it on the table, and pulled out a fresh blanket. Laid it beside her. "He won't be back," Clayton said. But he wasn't sure of that. Not truly. She nodded once, a small motion that barely counted. But it did. That evening, she followed him outside. The air was heavy with the scent of pine sap and smoke. They didn't speak. Just stood near each other, watching the wind comb through the tall grass. And then, without warning, she said, "Thank you." He turned, surprised by the sound. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the sound of someone deciding not to be afraid, even if only for a moment. She looked at him fully now. Not like a stranger. Not like a ghost. But like a woman still finding her name. He offered the smallest nod. Then returned his gaze to the horizon. The wind had shifted. The smell of rain was coming. Something had changed between them. Not love. Not yet. But something solid, a kind of trust that doesn't come from words, only presence. They would not speak of the man again. Not unless he returned. And somewhere deep inside her, a flicker of something lit up, not memory, but choice. She was beginning to stay. It rained for 2 days straight. A gentle, persistent kind of rain, the sort that softened the earth and slowed time to a whisper. The cabin creaked and sighed beneath the weight of damp air, and the world outside blurred into grays and greens, washed clean of dust and memory. Inside, the fire never went out, and something else, Something quieter and more delicate began to warm between them. Clayton watched her from across the room, not with hunger or need, but with a kind of reverence. She moved differently now, no longer shrinking from every sound or shadow. She stood taller, even when silence pressed in. Her hands had begun to reach for things without hesitation. Cup, a pan, the window latch, as though the world, once dangerous and sharp, was slowly becoming something she could touch again without bleeding. He still didn't know her name. She hadn't offered it and he hadn't asked. Names, he reckoned, came second to trust. And trust had been blooming in slow, quiet increments, the way wildflowers grew between cracks in stone. Steady, unannounced, beautiful because of what it defied. They fell into a rhythm neither of them spoke of. In the mornings, she stirred the oats while he fetched water. They ate together without ceremony, the scrape of spoons and the soft crackle of fire their only music. She began tending the garden patch behind the cabin, weeding and turning soil with bare hands, eyes focused, lips pressed into a line of quiet determination. He left tools out for her. She never asked, and he never explained. That was how they spoke, in actions. By the end of the week, she was laughing. It happened by accident. A squirrel had found its way into the cabin during one of Clayton's evening hunts. When he returned, she stood on a chair with a broom in her hand, eyes wide but lips twitching. The squirrel had knocked over a tin of flour, leaving powdery footprints across the floor. And as he stepped through the door and took in the sight, the animal darting under the table, her breathless expression, the absurdity of it all, something broke open in her. She laughed. Loud and sudden, like thunder breaking a long drought. Clayton froze. Then, slowly, he smiled. Not just at her, but with her. The kind of smile that made his eyes crinkle at the edges, like warmth returning to frozen ground. Later that night, they sat on the porch, both nursing small cups of coffee. The rain had finally stopped, and the stars peeked out like shy children from behind scattered clouds. She leaned back against the wall, cup resting against her chest. "I remember a dress," she said suddenly. "Yellow. I think it had little flowers on it. My mother made it, I think. Or maybe I just wanted her to." He didn't respond right away. Let the moment breathe. "Sounds like a good dress," he said softly. She nodded. "It was. I wore it when I ran away. I think I left it behind when everything went dark." Her voice broke just slightly. Not a sob. Just the tremble of someone learning to hold their pain without letting it drown them. He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need to. The next morning, she gave him her name. Mara. She spoke it like a confession, as if it might still bring danger, but also with the weight of someone reclaiming herself. Mara. He repeated it once, quiet and sure, then nodded like it had always belonged to her. After that, she changed again. Not in loud ways. Just in the lightness of her step, the way she hummed as she cooked, the way she began to look him in the eyes and hold there a little longer than before. Clayton felt it, too, the shift. The way his cabin no longer felt like a stop between places, but something more solid. The way his silence, once a wall, became a comfort between them. She filled spaces in his life he hadn't known were hollow. And in return, he gave her something rare, space to be without fear. But peace in the West was never made to last. It came with a telegram. The boy from town brought it in the saddlebag mail run. He knocked once, wet and winded, and handed over the folded paper without a word. Clayton opened it under the flickering oil lamp, Mara looking on from across the room. He read it once, then again. She watched the color drain from his face. "What is it?" she asked. He passed it to her slowly. "Missing woman reported. Description matches female found near South River. Traveling south in search. Asterisk. No name. No sender. But the implication was clear." She read it once, her fingers trembling. He watched her expression shift, fear first, then anger. Then something else. Resolve. "I won't run again," she said quietly. He believed her. That night they sat in silence. She sharpened the knife. He checked the door bolt. Neither spoke of what might come, but both knew the road ahead had narrowed. In the quiet, she reached across the table and took his hand. Her touch was light, but it held weight. And just like that, they weren't alone anymore. The next morning, she braided her hair and put on her boots before sunrise. Clayton saddled both horses. They didn't speak of where they were going. They just knew they needed to be ready, not to run, but to meet what was coming. She stood in the doorway, silhouetted by morning gold, and looked out over the wet, glistening trees. He came to stand beside her. Mara breathed in deep, as if anchoring herself. "They'll come," she said. "I know. And when they do, we'll face them. Not as protector and protected. Not as stranger and stranger. But as two people who, by sheer grace and quiet courage, had chosen to stand beside one another in a world that rarely allowed such things." Outside, the wind stirred the leaves, and the stillness before the storm began. The days that followed held a strange stillness, like the hush before a rifle cracks through morning air. Mara moved with quiet purpose, no longer shrinking from shadows. She woke early, made coffee before the first light bled into the trees, and sometimes rode out just past the ridge, always returning with kindling, sometimes berries, and once a wild rose tucked behind her ear. She didn't speak of fear anymore. She didn't have to. It lived in the edge of her voice when she laughed, in the careful way her eyes scanned the horizon when they thought she wasn't looking. Clayton felt it too. The invisible tension. A string pulled taut between what was and what might be. He worked the land harder now, sharpening tools that didn't need it, stacking wood higher than necessary. Not for the chore's sake, but to quiet his mind. His thoughts circled the same worry like buzzards around a dying thing, that someone out there claimed her. That someone believed they owned her. That whoever sent the telegram would arrive not with questions, but with authority, real or forged, to take her back into the dark. And what would he do then? He didn't know. She was not his. That truth held like cold iron in his chest. But the thought of watching her disappear, of seeing her vanish into a wagon or back east with a man who would cage her again, struck deeper than any bullet ever had. One afternoon, they sat side by side on the porch steps, watching the shadows grow long and lean across the land. The heat had broken for a spell, and the breeze carried the scent of pine and coming rain. "You never ask what happened," she said softly. "I figured you'd tell me when you could." Her fingers toyed with a thread on her sleeve. "I remember more now. Not all of it, but enough." He stayed silent, gaze fixed on the trees. "I was promised to a man," she said. "My father owed him, money or favors, I don't know. He was rich, older. Said all the right things in front of people. But in private," her voice thinned. "He was cruel. Not just in fists. In ways that made me forget how to breathe." Clayton clenched his jaw but let her speak. "I ran. Took the river because it was the only thing I couldn't be followed through. I thought maybe if I left no trail, he couldn't find me. But someone did. Someone he paid, maybe. I woke up bound in a wagon. I must have jumped, or got thrown out. I don't remember the fall, just the water. The cold. Then you." She looked at him then, eyes full of a storm she'd kept locked away. "You saved me. But more than that, you didn't ask for anything back." Clayton turned to her finally. "A life ain't something anyone's got a right to claim. You came here broken, sure. But not empty." She nodded, quiet again. Then came the horses. It was the next evening, near dusk, when Clayton spotted them from the ridge. Two riders, both dressed too fine for the trail, moving slow but sure. One of them led a third horse, empty-saddled. Meant for someone. Meant for her. He returned to the cabin with dust on his coat and eyes hard like flint. "They're coming," he said simply. Mara was already gathering her few things, not out of fear, but preparation. Her knife. A folded scarf. The rose she'd dried on the windowsill. "They won't take me," she said. "I won't let them." But even as he said it, he knew how little that might mean if the law was on their side, or worse, if it was forged to look like it was. Men of money had ways of twisting truth into chains. That night Nather slept. She stood by the hearth, watching embers turn to ash, while he leaned against the wall, rifle across his knees. And as dawn broke over the hills, painting the world in soft firelight, the sound of hooves drew near. Clayton stepped outside. The first rider dismounted slowly, a tall man in a clean coat and polished boots. His mustache was trimmed fine, and the look in his eyes said he was used to being obeyed. "I'm here for the girl," he said flatly. "Name's Hollis. Her fiancé. Or was." Clayton didn't move. "She's not yours to take. She's mine by law. Got papers in my satchel that say so. She disappeared from my home, and I'm within my rights to retrieve her." Behind him, Mara stepped onto the porch. "I'm not your wife," she said, voice clear and sure. He turned to her, eyes narrowing. "You made vows. You broke them. I never did. I never signed anything. You made promises, and you kept none." The man's face tightened. "You think a stray like you can just run? Think kindness buys you a new life?" Clayton's voice cut in, low and steady. "She's not property. She's not for sale. And if you try to take her by force..." The second rider shifted uneasily. "Hollis, maybe we oughta..." "No," Hollis snapped. "She's coming with me." Mara stepped down from the porch, not toward him, but toward Clayton. She stood beside him, shoulders back, eyes blazing. "You may have money," she said to Hollis, "and forged papers. But you don't have me. Not anymore." The silence hung like thunder. Hollis reached for something in his coat, maybe a paper, maybe a pistol. Clayton didn't flinch, just shifted his stance slightly. The second rider stepped forward quickly, hands raised. "Enough. This ain't how this ends. She don't want to go, and you can't make her. Not here." Hollis spat on the ground, turned on his heel. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "Both of you." Then he mounted, yanked the reins hard, and rode out the way he came, a storm with no thunder, just dust in his wake. When the sound of hoofbeats vanished, Mara exhaled a breath she'd been holding for too long. Clayton turned to her, eyes searching. "You all right?" She looked up at him. "I am now." In that moment, with the sky golden above and the earth still beneath their feet, something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not yet, but a vow deeper than words. The kind made by shared burdens, by quiet bravery, by the choice to stand and stay. The danger was not gone. Not truly. But for the first time in a long time, the ground felt like it belonged to both of them.